All right, what's up, everybody? It's Roman Gennaro, host of the Empire Sports Talk podcast, and we are back. It's been a couple weeks because we've been really busy. I'll tell you guys this now. We restarted the blog that kind of started all of this back in 2012. Before podcasting was really a thing, I really wanted to get into the sports thing. I didn't know how, so I started what a lot of people had at the time, a blog. And then a couple years down the road, podcasting kind of started to become known more widely. And I started a podcast and I kept up with the blog as a companion piece to it. And then as things progressed, as time went on, it was a little too tough to keep up with both and hold down a full-time job at the time. And I was still in school, so I kind of let the blog kind of lapsed in 2018 and just focused solely on the podcast. But now I realized there were things that I wanted to touch on that I didn't necessarily want to talk about on this podcast, or I wanted to be able to go into more detail and take my time with it. So, and I didn't just want to go back to blogger.com where I had the last version of the podcast. So we actually purchased a domain. It's empiresportstalk.com, where that is mainly our blog site. But we are also putting up some content from these podcasts. We're putting up a couple of the shorts that go on social media. So if you go over to empiresportstalk.com, you'll see most of our older posts. The last time we posted regularly was 2018, and then we put it down for a while while we put the podcast down for a while too, and then to focus on other things in life. And then we picked the podcast back up in 2022 and then didn't pick up the blog again until now, but that has changed. The blog is back at empiresportstalk.com, and you'll see that we've kind of spent the last couple of weeks trying to flood the site with a few new posts, and we'll touch on one of those a little bit later. But let's go ahead and jump in to this episode. The first thing I want to talk about is the U.S. Olympic closing ceremonies was last night as we're recording this. It is Monday evening, and I wanted to touch on a couple of things in what was a very exciting time for USA Olympics. So I wanted to touch on a few highlights for me. The first one was that USA and China tied at 40 gold medals, which was Olympic history because it was the first time ever that there was a tie for most gold medals during the Summer Olympics. And that is between the US and China. And the US dominated the total medal count with 126 total medals, 35 more than second place China. So congratulations to Team USA overall and to really all the countries who competed, but Team USA came away with the most medals total and the most overall gold medals. The first person I want to talk about and give shout out to is of course Katie Ledecky. She's the most decorated Olympian of all time, but she had one particular race. It was the women's 1500 meter freestyle where I feel like dominated is not the right word for what she did during this one. This was you probably saw the video online where she won by almost 10.5 seconds. And it was this situation where you see her going along and getting towards the finish, and you even hear the commentators mention during the race that one of the guys said, I think I just saw the cameraman have to zoom out to see the other competitors in the race. That's how far ahead Katie Ledecky was. And it was a situation where she finished, and it was an Olympic record, by the way, and it had time to watch her finish, zoom in on her reaction, go up into the stands to her family, then cut back to the race where you finally see the second place. I believe France was second place and Italy was third, but you finally see them come into the picture. Dominated doesn't feel like a strong enough word for what Katie Ledecky did in the 1500. She did say that she wanted to compete again in 2028 because it's in the U.S., so I hope we see her again to further cement her greatness in 2028. The next thing I want to talk about is USA Basketball, both men's and women's, defended their titles. It was the 8th straight gold medal for the U.S. women's. And it got interesting for them when up by 3 against France, France's Gabby Williams forced up the shot that would have tied the game, but her foot was on the line, so it counted for 2, and the U.S. women escaped by 1 point to win their 8th straight gold medal. The men also defended their gold medal, had a little bit of an easier time than the women in the final, but not that much because it took a dagger three from Steph Curry late in the game to lift the U.S. men over Victor Wembanyama and France. But Steph Curry came up big when it mattered. There were some games in the group play that he didn't shoot as well, but in the semifinal against Nikola Jokic in Serbia, he had 36 points, and in the final he had 24. And so when it mattered most, the best shooter in NBA history did exactly that. What I did find interesting is that USA Basketball carried their year-long feud with runner Noah Lyles into the Olympics. Because if you remember, about a year ago, Noah Lyles made comments that he wasn't sure why, and he meant all U.S. sports leagues, but he specifically targeted the NBA because his comments came not long after the NBA Finals when the Nuggets won the championship, and he brought to attention the fact that he didn't understand why NBA champions, and for the sake of argument, NFL champions, MLB champions, called themselves world champions when their leagues play solely in America. And a lot of athletes didn't take that well, specifically the NBA, because, again, that's who he was targeting because he said it right after the finals. And they didn't forget. They kept the receipts. And after Noah Lyles finished his what ended up being his last race of the Olympics with the bronze medal, which ended up being the men's 200 meter. There were several tweets, but the men's basketball team said, "We don't stop at bronze," or something to that effect. I know I'm paraphrasing, but something nodding to the fact that Noah Lyles got bronze and not gold, conveniently forgetting that he had won gold in the men's in the men's 100 just a day or two earlier. So I find it interesting that the NBA players chose to continue their feud with Noah Lyles, even though we were at the Olympics. This is supposed to be a time where the country for the athletes and the country for the viewers at home comes together to support their country, and yet there was infighting between U.S. Olympians. And even Zaire Franklin, the linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts, chimed in and said, "Noah Lyles is my least favorite American," is what he was quoted saying, "my least favorite American," to his comments as well. And I love you, Zaire, and I get why the athletes are frustrated. Has Noah Lyles said things in the past that were, questionable? Has he opened his mouth before when he hasn't needed to? Yes, we all have. But I gotta tell you, and I said it then and I'll say it now, Noah Lyles is not wrong. I think the American Sports League athletes were just sensitive. We just won our biggest accomplishment. Speaking of the NBA players, we just won our biggest accomplishment, and here you are downgrading that in a way because you're saying we shouldn't call ourselves world champions. He's not wrong, because the NBA plays largely in America, and then there's the Toronto Raptors. The NBA plays in North America only. The NFL plays in the United States only. They do have international games, but they're not playing international competition. Major League Baseball has the Toronto Blue Jays, but play in North America only. All Noah Lyles was saying is, as an athlete that competes regularly and his main job is to run and qualify for these Olympics, as someone who competes regularly with international competition, he looks at that and says, wait, you guys call yourself world champions, and yet you largely never leave the boundaries of your home country. He's got a point. Now, I understand why the athletes didn't like it. What happened in these 2 weeks, those are world champions. When you can stand up against literally the best the world has to offer, the best that other countries in the world have to offer, that is when you can call yourself a world champion. When you are faced with a test from outside your comfort zone, when you put on your country's colors and win against international competition, that is it. Just a little bit ago, Jason Tatum with the Boston Celtics became an NBA champion. But one day ago, he became a world champion. And that is the distinction that Noah Lyles wanted to make. He didn't go about it the best way, but he is correct. If you don't play outside the boundaries of your country, you're not a world champion. You're a league champion, and there's nothing wrong with that. You could say NBA champion, NFL champion, Super Bowl champion, World Series champion. World Series is another thing. That's just what it's called. But you're not a world champion until you go and beat the world, which is what Olympians like Noah Lyles know a lot about. And so the players on the Olympic teams that go out and win gold medals, they are world champions. Anything other than that, you're a league champion. It's just a fact. But I understand why those athletes took it to heart when it started. I thought it was a bit silly, but I get it. Bringing it up 1 year later during the Olympics against an athlete from your own country when it is about country versus country is tacky, and I don't like that American athletes are doing that. The Olympics are a time to put all that stuff down. It's not about a feud you have with another U.S. athlete at that time. It's about coming together and winning medals. The U.S. did that. Congratulations. A couple other notes from the United States. I want to congratulate USA runner Grant Fisher for an exciting come-from-behind race in the men's 5,000 meter to grab the bronze. I was watching that particular event with my family. I went to see family this weekend, and it didn't look like the Americans were going to medal. It didn't look like they were doing the best showing in the world. And then Grant Fisher snuck in there and literally passed up and got into third at the last possible second. So it was wildly exciting. And congratulations to Grant Fisher on his bronze medal there. The U.S. women dominated the 4x400 meter relay, and I want to mention those four athletes by name. So I'm gonna do that now. Congratulations to Shamir Little, Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone, Gabby Thomas, and Alexis Holmes on absolutely dominating the 4x400, specifically the middle two. I believe that was Levrone and Thomas, where especially Sydney McLaughlin-Levrone pulled so far out ahead and really sealed it in that second leg for the U.S. And then the last two legs after her just continued to build to an utter domination there. That was exciting to watch. And just for me to call this out because it's my favorite event in the Summer Olympics, congratulations to the U.S. men's water polo team for winning the bronze medal with a bronze medal game victory against Hungary and medaling in water polo for the first time in 16 years. So those are my notes for what was a great Olympic 2 weeks. It was such a great time. Can't wait for 2028 in LA. But until then, we're going to put a bow on this one. Congratulations to all the countries and all the athletes that won medals, but specifically to the U.S. athletes that totaled 126 medals. The Olympics are something so special, and that's something that you can never take away from them. That's something that it's hard to put into. I was thinking about this. I was watching the athletes stand on the podium, and the country's national anthems were playing, and it's like that's something that no one else other than that select people that's there at the Olympics with you that have stood on that first platform or any of the three platforms really. Medaling is so special regardless of the color of your medal. That's something that you can't describe, that you can't equate to anything else in sports or life or anything. There's no comparisons to be drawn. It's truly a one-of-a-kind thing, and it's so special for these athletes that they get to say that they were a part of that. Congratulations again to those athletes. I want to go immediately now to Major League Baseball. As we said, we've been off for a couple of weeks as we've been working to get the blog and the website up. And so I wanted to touch on one thing that happened a few weeks ago, which was the All-Star game. And not specifically the All-Star game, even though the All-Star break is a great time. It was super, super fun. It was super special for Paul Skeens to make literally his 12th Major League start in the All-Star game. He's a rookie making his 12th career start on the mound in Arlington as the starting pitcher for the All-Star game. And he's being talked about for Cy Young. I think what he's doing, what he's been able to do, when they got to the All-Star game, they said this time a year ago he was pitching at LSU, and now he's on the mound at the All-Star game in the first inning. It's something so special and cool. But what I want to talk about is the bad taste that Commissioner Rob Manfred left in a lot of people's mouths because as you know, the managers for the MLB All-Star game are the two managers that managed in the previous year's World Series. So the World Series last year was Texas's Bruce Bochy and Arizona's Torey Lovullo. So Torey Lovullo had the responsibility and the privilege of picking his starting lineup of the players who were voted in by fans to make the NL All-Star squad, which that's another thing. I don't think I can do another episode on that. I don't think fans should be allowed to vote for All-Star participants because that just turns into a popularity contest, and it's fine if you're going to do that, but a lot of time All-Star game appearances factor into Hall of Fame resumes, and so if you're going to have something that devolves into a popularity contest, it shouldn't be taken into consideration, and it shouldn't be taken into Hall of Fame consideration, and if you are going to take it into Hall of Fame consideration, fans shouldn't be allowed to vote. That's a whole other thing. But Rob Manfred, after the All-Star game, after Paul Skeens had started the All-Star game, comes out to say that if Torey Lovullo had not chosen Paul Skeens to start and instead chosen, it was between Paul Skeens and Chris Sale, who, by the way, would have been very deserving of it as well. Manfred said if Torey Lovullo had not have chosen Paul Skeens, he would have stepped in and forced Lovullo to start Skeens. Let me start by saying, I understand. I understand why Rob Manfred would say, hey, this guy is the talk of baseball. Baseball doesn't get an electrifying presence like this every single year. What he's doing is unprecedented. He needs to start for the All-Star game. Publicity, I get it. But what points does it win Rob Manfred to come in after the fact and say, if this manager, who was perfectly within his rights to make the decisions that he made, did not make the decision he ultimately ended up making, I would have overridden him. What points does it win him to say, if he made the wrong decision and chose to start Chris Sale, I would have stepped in and said, I don't think so. Who do you think you are? Like, you're not winning any popularity contests as it is. Like, baseball fans are already counting down the days till you leave office in 2029, and then you come in here after the fact. You don't have to say anything. The All-Star game was great. Paul Skeens started. People watched. The festivities were a success. And you come in, and Torey Lovullo catches a stray from you and said, oh yeah, well, he got it right, but if he didn't, I would have stepped in because I knew what was right. What's the purpose of that? It doesn't make you look good. Every talking head I've heard about it has said the same thing. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say. Why would you say that? It doesn't matter. It's over. Not to mention that if, like I said, Torey Lovullo had chosen Chris Sale, which he's perfectly within his rights to do, and Chris Sale would have deserved it as much as Paul Skeens, if you had come in and said, no, 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 you would have, again, looked like the jerk. People would have understood. There would have been people that have been like, oh, Paul Skeens should start, and I believe he should have, and I'm glad that he did. But what a slap in the face it would have been to not only Chris Sale, but to Torey Lovullo's managerial status in that game, an honor that he earned by getting his Arizona Diamondbacks to the World Series the previous year. for some suit who has never been on a Major League Baseball field in uniform, who is not a manager, who was not, like, at least Bud Selig was owner of the Milwaukee Brewers for years before he was the commissioner of the league. Rob Manfred was a lawyer, much like Roger Goodell in the NFL. In the NFL, and this is why fans don't love them, because they feel like they're coming in and overreaching and making changes to the game that either are, in the eyes of many, softening the game, or changes that are uncalled for, unasked for, not needed. But what this reminded me of most is my dad, and this is not a slight on my dad, but there's this thing that he does. You'll be in a room with the whole family, and you'll ask a question. You'll be like, "Oh, so who did this thing? What is that?" You'll ask a question that has an answer. It's not rhetorical or something. And you'll say, "Who was the director of this movie?" And my dad will be the last to speak, and we'll throw answers around, and then we'll finally look it up because we're not 100% sure, and we'll say, "Oh, it's Christopher Nolan," and then my dad will be like, "Oh yeah, that's who I thought it was." Well, you only spoke up after we confirmed it. Why didn't you say anything when we were asking the question? When that opinion would have been like, "Oh yeah, that's the answer, thanks." And I feel like it's just again, love you, Dad, but it's my dad wanting to be right in the end. And so I feel like this was a desperate attempt for Manfred, who knows he's not liked. I think there's a reason that he announced this year that his final year was going to be 2029, because he senses the heat from fans and players, because the uniform debacle this year, that the MLB has already reversed track and said they're going to revert back to what it was last year for uniforms as far as the lettering and everything like that. Rob Manfred senses that heat and is doing everything he possibly can to be on the right end of things. I mean, we've seen, like, in 2021, they took the All-Star game out of Atlanta. Some political voting things that Georgia had done as a state that were completely unrelated from Major League Baseball, completely unrelated from the Atlanta Braves. Nobody was really asking that the All-Star game be moved out of Atlanta. And yet Rob Manfred stepped in and said, "Oh, yeah, we're going to go with the political climate and say it's not a good time to have this in Atlanta, blah, blah, blah." And then fans, not just of the Braves, but of Major League Baseball, is like, what are you doing? Like, the Braves are just a casualty here. Like, they didn't have anything to do with this. This is not the Atlanta Braves' fault. It's not the city of Atlanta's fault. It has nothing to do with Major League Baseball. And so very, very, very quickly, Rob Manfred was like, "Oh, we'll give him the All-Star game back in 2025. Rob Manfred just seems like my dad in those moments where you ask a random question where he waits for the answer to be revealed, and he's like, "Oh yeah, that's what I thought. I knew the correct answer all along, and now I can prove that I'm right." You don't get to come out after the fact and say, "Hey, you know that thing that already happened? I was in on it the whole time. I was going to say do that the whole time. I was going to pull unnecessary power," which, really, he's the commissioner of baseball. He has power to do a lot of things. He shouldn't have the power to override a coach's decision in any capacity. Somebody that's on the field, somebody that is in the locker room, somebody that's with the game night and day. Rob Manfred is in a cushy office in New York, as far away from MLB action as possible. So even if it came down to it, he shouldn't be allowed to override Torey Lovullo in that situation and say, "Oh, Chris Sale, shouldn't start because we want, more people to watch the game." No. And I know maybe this whole topic is ridiculous because in the end, Paul Skeens did start and it was great. But the completely unnecessary fact of it that Manfred came out after and said that, "Oh, I would have done this. I would have pulled Sale. I would have prevented Chris Sale from starting if the worthy manager had tapped a worthy pitcher for an honor he deserved." It was unnecessary. So I'm going to take a shot at him that it's over. I'm going to take as unnecessary a shot at Rob Manfred as Rob Manfred took at Torey Lovullo and Chris Sale after the All-Star game. Before we get out of baseball, I want to talk a little bit more about what's actually happening on the field before I get too fired up. As of yesterday, again, we're recording this on Monday, we put out our weekly power rankings for Major League Baseball, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. After a little bit of a skid, the Philadelphia Phillies are back on top. They are 69-48. That is the National League's best record. The Yankees are back up at number 3 after a rough stretch. They started 50-22, and then I think they went on a stretch where they were under 500 for almost 2 months. And things were looking really rough for the Yankees, but it was hard to tell if you were watching it casually because their record was still good because, again, they started 50-22. They're currently 70-49, so they are only 20-27 since that start. But they are playing a little bit better as of late. They're 6-4 in their last 10. They looked to there was a period there where they were really in a funk, and you could tell it looked like maybe it was time for Aaron Boone to go, and I still think that may be the case depending on what happens in the postseason. I'll post an article about that later. But right now the Cleveland Guardians are scuffling for the first time this year. They're down to 4 at 69-49. The Dodgers, even though they're 68-49, I haven't really been able to get a read on them. They've had a couple instances this season where they haven't looked like themselves, where they've scuffled for extended periods. And again, like the Yankees, it's hard to notice because they are 68-49. But, you know, when you're a team with World Series expectations and multiple MVPs and the best player in the world, any amount of trouble is going to open some eyes. Milwaukee has been a bit of a surprise for me this year. I did not think they would be this good because their pitching is consistently kind of So it's just how far their bat's going to take them. But this year they've consistently been at the top of the NL Central. And I have them at number 6 this week. Minnesota, they are still sitting at number 7. They've kind of hovered right around that middle ground area of the top 10 all year long. And for the first time since what I called week 0, because they played a week early against the Dodgers, the San Diego Padres are on the list as they have been surging for the past couple of weeks. They're 8-2 in their last 10, and they have surged to within 3 games of the NL West. As good as the Dodgers are playing, the Padres and the Arizona Diamondbacks are right there. Speaking of the Diamondbacks, I have them at number 9 as they're the other team that's surging right now. They also are 8-2 in their last 10 and playing, and they look like the team that made a run to the World Series a year ago after struggling for most of the first half. They finally look like the team that we remember from a year ago. And Jock Peterson, who was an addition in the offseason, looks like the Jock Peterson that propelled the Braves to the 2021 championship. He's having a career year in Arizona, and they are at number 9, rounding out my top 10 power rankings for what is now week 19 of the Major League Baseball season. Hard to believe we're in the second half already. The Kansas City Royals, they have been on this list for most of the year. They've fallen off a couple times, but they've picked up their play again recently. They're at number 10 at 65-53. The team that I wanted to mention that's not on this list is the former team of Jock Peterson that I mentioned a moment ago. The Atlanta Braves have been on the power rankings for most of the season because, and I know people like Ben Verlander do their power rankings based the play of that week. I've based the power rankings for most of the season on the win percentage of the teams. And so a lot of these teams have kind of stayed put most of the year because of win percentage. And that's why the Yankees have remained on the list despite really struggling in the middle there. That's why the Braves have remained on the list despite really, really struggling this season. And the time came where they fell off. This is as bad as I've seen the Braves look under Brian Snitker. Because he came in 2018 and they made the postseason as the surprise. But then once they did that in 2019, it was like, oh, this team is a World Series contender, and they ultimately got there. They came so close against LA in 2020 in the NLCS, and then they got it done in 2021, and then they've won 100 games each of the last couple of years. And this is the worst that they have looked under Brian Snitker. It doesn't help that they've been decimated by injuries this season. Spencer Strider, Ronald Acuna, Ozzie Albies have all missed significant time, and that's just to name a few. Michael Harris Jr., who's expected back soon, but at this point I don't know how much difference it's going to make, because there are players on this team that are having career years. Reynaldo Lopez, Chris Sale, and Reynaldo Lopez is currently on the 15-day injured list, but Chris Sale, it looks like the Chris Sale of old. Marcell Ozuna is having the best year of his career. If it weren't for a man named Shohei Ohtani, Marcell Ozuna would probably be the front runner for MVP. But the fact that Shohei is no longer in the American League, and the fact that the Braves just cannot get it together are probably going to hurt him. But he's having a career year and deserves mention. But this team is not good. Despite, having good performances from players, they can't seem to get out of their own way. Yesterday, individually, let's talk about their last game that they played to get them to 61-56, now tied with the New York Mets, 8 games behind the Phillies. They were up 8-2 in the 8th inning and allowed a 7-run 8th inning to a 44-75 Colorado Rockies team to lose the series. And in their last few, because this also comes at a time where the Philadelphia Phillies are just coming out of a slump of their own. And it looked like Atlanta was finally going to wake up and take back the division, or at least challenge for the division, because they opened up a 4-game series against the Miami Marlins and won the first 2, getting to within 5 games of Philadelphia for the lead. Then they proceeded to lose the next 2 to Miami, go on to face Milwaukee, who is admittedly good, but prior to the last couple of weeks, I viewed as the weakest division leader in Major League Baseball, get swept by them pretty handily, and then come into Colorado and lose 2 of 3, the last of which being the one I just mentioned. Yesterday's game was rock bottom. In the last 3 or so years, they've let franchise cornerstones walk. Freddie Freeman, Dansby Swanson, and by all accounts, it looks like Max Fried is getting ready to be the next one out the door. 3 franchise cornerstones in 4 years walking out the door. And all Alex Anthopoulos, as great as he is, seems to care about in the last couple of years is reuniting some middle-of-the-road guys. Bringing back Luke Jackson, bringing back Jorge Soler, bringing back Adam Duvall at the beginning of the year. And by the way, Luke Jackson was the one that did most of the damage yesterday in that 7-run 8th inning. With the departure of those guys, it doesn't seem like this team has a certain leader anymore. Freddie Freeman was the leader of that team for a long time. And then when he left, sure, it was Ronald's team, but the actual go-as-he-goes leader seemed to be Dansby Swanson. And this year, they didn't really have one, because you can be a veteran pitcher and a star pitcher, but it's kind of hard to be like the everyday leader of your team when you go every 5 days. So I can't say it's Max Fried or Charlie Morton, even though they provide some valuable veteran, leadership on the mound. But this year, if anyone, I would say the go as he goes guy was Ozzie Albies, and then he's missing in the middle of missing 8 weeks with a broken wrist. So now they really don't have one, because I wouldn't have said it was Ozzie for sure. The offensive leader this season has been Marcell Ozuna, but they're certainly not going as he's going, because he's been going since this time last year. Marcell Ozuna has been arguably the best hitter in baseball for over a calendar year now, and the Braves just continue to freefall. And I don't think it's going to get any better, because I think they go into a series with the San Francisco Giants tonight, who have won 8 of their last 2 and suddenly threatening in the NL wild card behind the Braves. They are currently a game and a half out of that 3rd spot. So it's going to be a battle for the 3rd spot. Now, they're not going to be able to easily roll over San Francisco, especially not if Logan Webb or Blake Snell are on the mound. Those 2 guys are going pretty good right now. So even though they're not on the power rankings list, I had to mention them because I just couldn't justify them staying on the list. Granted, this list is mostly influenced by win percentage, and they fell out of the top 10 there. But I wanted to move them out for a few weeks now. They've looked that bad. And there were a lot of Braves fans on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, who were calling for Snitker's job. And I've been a staunch defender of Snitker. Manager of the Year, All-Star Game Manager, World Series Champion, Braves lifer. Like, this is the guy, you got to give him benefit of the doubt. But after yesterday, watching how he managed yesterday and that collapse, I think, I'm not saying he should get the boot, but I think yesterday's loss puts him on the hot seat at least. And last but not least, I wanted to move on to the NFL. The preseason is underway. We've officially we are now in week 2 of the NFL preseason. Technically started a week ago with the Hall of Fame game. It started for everybody else this past weekend, and a few news and notes there. First thing I want to mention, just because I find it kind of ridiculous, Hassan Reddick has formally requested a trade as of today from the New York Jets, despite the fact that he has yet to report to camp. He has requested a trade after negotiations for a new contract broke down, and he was traded from the Eagles to the Jets in April ahead of the NFL draft. He has not reported to camp. He doesn't appear to be going to report to camp now that he has requested a trade, and the Jets have since come out and said, we kind of let Hassan's camp and we let everybody know where we stood even before the trade back in March, and the trade went through. Everything was good. And now, we're trying to work out a new contract. It's, we want to get it done, but they've said we will not trade Hassan Reddick. And I bring this up because I have very strong feelings about all the contract stuff. Players demanding contracts when they're still under contract. I'm going to save that for an upcoming blog post, so pay attention this week for that one. He was working on a contract with the Jets. And even if he doesn't get it done, which it doesn't appear like they're going to get it done, he's a free agent after this season. And the Jets are, if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy this year, a team that a lot of people are calling Super Bowl contender. And I'd argue, if Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, they're a better team than the team that he left right about now. He left the Eagles, who were in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago, now to the Jets, who last year were a dumpster because they were being quarterbacked by Zach Wilson after Aaron Rodgers went down. But they're in much better shape this year, especially if Rodgers stays healthy. But it's not like he's stuck with the Jets for a long term if he doesn't get a trade. He's a free agent after this season. So, worst case scenario, you play one season with the Jets under your current contract, which, by the way, is $15 million, and then you're a free agent. And you could have a shot at a Super Bowl this year with this team if everything works out. And now you're racking up over $1 million in fines for not showing up to camp, demanding a trade. They said they're not going to, so you're in a stalemate. And the fines are racking up, which, because you're a veteran on a veteran contract and not a rookie like not on a rookie deal like CeeDee Lamb or Brandon Ayuk, you can't get that money back. That $1 million plus is gone. It's gone. As I mentioned, CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk are current contract holdouts from their guys' camp, but both of those guys are still on rookie deals. So players on rookie deals that collect fines from not showing up for training camp and preseason, that money can be gotten back. But for Hassan Reddick, he's already racked up $1 million plus in fines, and he's not getting that back. I find the whole situation to be ridiculous. You're a free agent after this year. The Jets are supposed to be good, and yet here you are. I want so bad to talk about contracts on this, but I'm not going to. I'm going to save it, so please check that out, read that, and I want to get your thoughts on that, so keep a lookout. But I do want to get to the guys that did actually show up and did actually play. I want to talk about a couple of players and how they performed. The first person I want to talk about in the first week of league-wide preseason action is Beau. This is not going to be a save the best for last situation. Beau played really well in his action for the Broncos. Jared Stidham started. He's projected to be the day one starter. Beau was the number one guy for me for that week. He played really, really well. He had 125 yards, touchdown, 3 carries, 17 yards. Caleb Williams, everybody was waiting for the long-awaited preseason debut. He didn't play in the Hall of Fame game. 4 of 7 for 95 yards, made some really good throws, and also had 1 carry for 13 yards. So showing he's as good as we thought he was. Justin Fields, on the other hand, up and down. He was 5 for 6 for 67 yards. Good to see. He was throwing the ball well, but he did lose 2 fumbles. Maybe you can chalk that up to new team, new playbook, a little bit of uncertainty in training camp with Russ, the presumed starter, but he's not in camp because of an injury. So there's a lot of things, but he did fumble twice. Get that under control. I think he'll be fine. I do think that Russ is the starter, and I honestly believe Mike Tomlin is the coach that Russell Wilson needs to kind of revitalize his career. Pete Carroll and Mike Tomlin kind of remind me a lot of each other in the way that they're both player coaches. And Russ was kind of set up to fail in Denver. His first head coach was a guy who had no business being an NFL coach, Nathaniel Hackett, and his second coach was a guy who didn't want him from day one. So that's, Russ didn't have a great chance. I do think he has a lot of football left, future Hall of Famer. I think he will inevitably be the starter this year. I think he'll do all right. But that is really the only camp that has a quarterback competition. Michael Penix started instead of Kirk Cousins, who didn't play in the preseason opener and he's dealing with an injury, trying to get healthy for week 1. Kirk Cousins is presumably is going to probably be the starter all year. Michael Penix is a future plan for Atlanta, but Kirk Cousins is going to be the guy this year, and a lot of analysts believe he's going to have a really good year. But Michael Penix showed up and showed why he was the 8th overall pick and why he took the Washington Huskies to the national championship game. Quick release, made some good passes, looked really good in their preseason opener. And then the player I have to mention, he's one of my favorite players in the entire draft, Ben Sinnott, tight end for the Washington Commanders. Jaden Daniels did look really good, but I want to talk about Ben Sinnott, the tight end. He had 3 catches on 3 targets for 57 yards. Nothing too flashy, but he did have one particular catch where he rumbled down the middle, and some compared him just based on that body movement and that catch and the way he kind of went down the middle of the field to Gronk. I'm not saying he's going to be Gronk, but he's been one of my favorite players in the draft ever since they showed on draft night that clip of him absolutely leveling a guy during a hockey game. So I did want to bring up his stats just because Ben Sinnott's awesome, and I hope he does extremely well in the NFL. As I said, I skipped over some things I wanted to talk about because I wanted to drive y'all to the blog on empiresportstalk.com. But one thing that I did want to bring up, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the posts because we're on the NFL. I want to talk about, I released a couple days ago my 5 bold predictions for the NFL season, and I want to close with that. I won't go through all 5 because, honestly, I want you to read them. But I will go through a couple of them. And the first one is, one of my bold predictions for the season is that Sam Darnold is going to win the most improved player. Now, the NFL doesn't give out a most improved player. They give out a comeback player of the year, but those criteria were recently changed after Joe Flacco won the award instead of Damar Hamlin. So to make sure that doesn't happen again this year, the comeback player of the year has been altered, and the new criteria are that the award will go to a player who has demonstrated resilience in the face of adversity by overcoming illness, physical injury, or other circumstances that led to him missing playing time the previous season. So this would eliminate players like Sam Darnold and last year's winner Joe Flacco just for simply being out of the game or being benched or whatever the case is. While the NFL does not have a Most Improved Player award, the Pro Football Writers of America does. And so that's what I predicted last week, that I believe Sam Darnold will win the most improved player, because I do think that he kind of has gotten a bad rap at this point in his career. Everybody's so ready to call him one of the biggest busts ever because he was supposed to be the most pro ready coming out of the draft, but he hasn't really had much of a chance. He started for the Jets, and that team was a dumpster fire. He didn't have a lot of weapons or much of a chance there. Then he goes to the Panthers, and we've seen how big of a disaster that is with their owner David Tepper and Bryce Young having no help in his rookie season. And then he goes to be a backup in San Francisco to the boy wonder Brock Purdy. But now he finally has a chance in what I think is going to be the toughest division in football this year. But he finally has weapons. He has one of the best receiving cores in the NFL. He's got Aaron Jones in the backfield. He's got a good defense. Kevin O'Connell is a great coach. And I think this could be a really good year for Sam Darnold. Like I just said, J.J. McCarthy opened some eyes in the preseason opener. Sam Darnold did play, but I also have heard that J.J. has put on quite a show. Been a little bit of a surprise for coaches so far. He did play most of the snaps for Minnesota, and he went 11 for 17 for 188 yards and 2 touchdowns. He also rushed for 18 yards, and one of his touchdowns was a long touchdown pass that impressed star wide receiver Justin Jefferson. So there's something to be said for that. So I do think he's opening some eyes in the preseason, and I think the biggest criticism of him coming in the draft was his passing, is that he didn't throw a lot at Michigan, but that wasn't because he couldn't. And a lot of people use that as fuel to have him slide down the board, when in reality, like I said, that was just the game plan. That's what he was supposed to do. And it kind of reminded me of the criticism of Anthony Richardson coming out of Florida. We let one particular narrative kind of run the show when it wasn't the whole picture. And Anthony Richardson, his main criticism was he didn't play a lot at Florida. He was injured. He threw a lot of interceptions. And then he gets to the NFL, and it's pretty clear pretty quick that he's better than a lot of people thought. And yes, his rookie season got cut short due to a shoulder injury. But one thing that became very clear is that, like, you had your questions about Anthony Richardson, not because of Anthony Richardson, but because of the questionable at best coaching staff at the University of Florida, and that's been clear for a while. So I don't know why we wouldn't immediately be like, oh, it's Florida. Of course players out of there aren't going to look great. They haven't had a stable coach since Urban Meyer. All the Anthony Richardson thing tells me is the coaches at Florida sucked. Like, period. Because he was good in high school. He gets to college, and he was good enough with the team he had around him. And he gets to the NFL, and he's good. You need good coaching. Even the best players need good coaching, especially when they're young. So, it kind of reminds me of it's not that JJ couldn't throw. It's that he played at a college where he wasn't asked to as much because they had 2 really good running backs, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. But I do think Sam Darnold will play well enough to hold JJ off. I don't think there's a quarterback competition at this point, but we will wait and see. But my bold prediction is that Sam Darnold wins the PFWA's Most Improved Player award. And the other prediction that I want to talk about specifically, again, go to the EmpireSportsTalk.com to see the other 5 predictions. I will link this post specifically in the description of this episode on YouTube. One of my other predictions, and this one admittedly is the most far-fetched of the 5, is that New England will earn a wild card spot. Not with current starter Jacoby Brissett, not with 3rd overall pick Drake May, but with Joe Milton III, their 6th round selection in this year's draft. I've tempered a little bit on this with the news that the Patriots have released Juju Smith-Schuster and won't be going after Brandon Ayuk. I think that's a big mistake because receiver has been their big point of weakness in the last few years under Bill Belichick. Obviously, it's a new era with Gerard Mayo. I think that factors into this a little bit. But all reports have said that Joe Milton has outperformed Drake May in training camp. And it's to be assumed that at some point this year, Drake May would become the starter, because the current starter, even though he's serviceable, he's kind of Tyrod Taylor in this way. Jacoby Brissett, he's capable of being a season-long starter, but he's not the future of that franchise. This is now, I think, his third stint with New England. And he went 0 for 3 with 0 yards in the preseason debut. Drake May went 2 of 3 for 19 yards, but Milton went 4 of 6 for 54 yards, a touchdown, and 5 carries for 22 yards. Now, the quarterback that got most of the reps, which would seemingly indicate that as of right now he's QB2, is Bailey Zappi, who's the only other person besides Brissett on the quarterback depth chart that has NFL experience. But I expect really quickly for either Joe Milton or Drake May to rise to QB2, and I think it's going to be Joe Milton. We already know from combine footage and other things, and from his time in college, that he has a big arm. He gets the ball out fast, and we saw in the preseason opener that he can move with his legs. He's mobile, and that's the way that the NFL has gone. So I think I'll split this into two halves for the sake of this podcast. The Joe Milton starting part and the wild card part. I don't think that the wild card thing happens unless they go get a Brandon Ayuk or they get another receiver. But I'm pretty convinced that if Jacoby Brissett steps out of the starter's role, it will not be in favor of Drake May. It will be in favor of Joe Milton III. This has been a longer episode than I intended, so that's all I have for you. Again, go check out the blog and the things we've been working so hard on the last couple of weeks as we edge closer to podcast episode 100. We are so grateful for your support during this time. That's all I have for you. For Empire Sports Talk, I am your host, Roman Gennaro. It's a good day to go 1-0. I'll see you on the next one.